Hello, listeners. Kathy Lawless, Life Story Curator. I'm all about capturing and curating career and life stories as a meaningful way to celebrate a milestone moment like a big O birthday, anniversary, retirement, or graduation. And I'm at my best when curating photo books that move your memories from the basement or your phone or your computer to the coffee table, giving you and your family and friends access to these treasured memories for years to come. I also love curating and capturing life and career stories through this podcast series, How Did I Get Here? It's a series of interviews designed for people just starting out in their careers, people in transition, or possibly feeling stuck, and giving them access to the stories of people who have been there, done that, so that they might be inspired with some new ideas, or maybe just comforted knowing they're not alone, that everybody starts somewhere and everybody goes through times of transition and times when they feel stuck. Today, I'm very excited to be interviewing Jervis DiCicco. Welcome, Jervis.
Thank you, Kathy. I'm so glad to be here.
And Jervis is the co-founder and CEO of ProsperBridge, which we'll get into in just a minute. Pause for a moment to hear from a very happy Life Story Curator client.
My name is Eleanor Allen, and I recently finished a project with Kathy about my mother's life story. And the reason I wanted to do her life story was that she's first 91 years old. And second, we've been talking about it for years as a family. I have 4 brothers and many nieces and nephews. And we'd never gotten around to making the book. Then one day I was out with another friend who's a mutual friend of mine and Kathy's. And she showed me the book that Kathy had made about her parents' 50th wedding anniversary. And I thought right then and there, this is the answer. I got to hire Kathy to get this life story finally done for my mother. So I did. And working with Kathy is just a joy and a pleasure. So first, how do you organize somebody's 90 plus years into a story that's succinct, but also very interesting? And Kathy helped guide myself and my niece and one of my brothers. I have 4 brothers. One of them worked on this project with us intensely into the storyboarding process, and then working into, okay, these are the chapters of her life we're going to work on, which we went by decade. And then for each decade of her life, what do we need? We need this many pictures and this many vignettes. And then Kathy also brought in this great idea to put in QR codes of recordings. I hadn't even thought of that, but we did several of those. Some are my mother's audio recordings. We captured some of those audio files. Some are video recordings of her telling stories of her life that we have in the book, but of course, much more detail when we have the recording. And some QR codes are also documents. So we put a link to my father's autobiography that he had written for us before he passed as well, and my grandfather's autobiography that my father had done interviewing my grandfather. So very special, and those come to life as well in the book. So I encourage you, if you have any inclination of documenting someone's life story in your life, definitely go for it. It's worth the work, and the product, in this case, my mother's story, is absolutely wonderful, and she was over the moon with joy. So don't wait, do it. Document the life of your loved ones or whatever special occasion there is, and work with Kathy, and you will have a wonderful experience.
But Jervis, as you know, we always like to start with the icebreaker questions. So if you would, tell us where you grew up, what part of the country or part of the world, and where you fit in the birth order of your family, and how you think both those things, the geography and your birth order, may have shaped you as an individual.
I grew up in the Detroit suburbs, northwest Detroit, the Birmingham, Bloomfield area, if anyone is familiar with that area, and loved growing up there. Did not have any idea how beautiful the country was growing up in the corner of Michigan there, other than northern Michigan and Lake Michigan, which I loved, but did not get out west until quite some time later. And didn't really see mountains until high school. So that was a very interesting experience. And, once you've sort of experienced Colorado, at least for me, or mountains or ocean, it's very hard to go back to Southwest Michigan, or really anywhere in the Midwest that doesn't have something special about it, like the dunes on Lake Michigan or Lake Superior. There's some beautiful spots there, but so yeah, that was a big part of my growing up. It's a great place to be from. Was a
You like that, to be from?
Yeah, exactly. Was a beautiful, safe place to grow up, and I'm now grateful to be out here in Colorado. I was the third of three boys, and I have a half brother who's 12 years younger than me, but our relationship has always been a little bit more like, uncle nephew than less so now, but when he was growing up, than brother, because his dad died when he was 5. So it was me and mom, and my two brothers by that time were out of the house. It was me and mom and Charlie. The other way that impacts me is, being the youngest, growing up the youngest, is a unique experience. I got my butt kicked a lot by my brothers. I think I learned how to annoy people very effectively, because if you can't fight with your hands, you better be able to frustrate them. And now that I'm a parent, you learn the lesson of the first child is your parents adapt their parenting style to that first child, and they may do their best to adapt it to future children, but it's very hard once you're in a rhythm. So my oldest brother Ray was named after my dad's dad. The middle brother JP was named after my dad, and my name Jervis was my grandmother's third husband. So
Okay.
yeah, that's what happens when you're the youngest of three boys. They run out of names, they run out of ideas.
Yeah. And so what was the age difference between you and your brothers? But not your stepbrother, you already explained that.
Yep. The oldest brother is 5 years older than me. The middle brother is 3 years older than me, and then Charlie's 12 years younger.
Yeah. Yeah. So you were used to being youngest, and then now all of a sudden you got to be the one probably doing the teaching the lessons. Except for, like you said, 12 years is a pretty big span. That's almost
yeah, I never beat up my little brother.
Yeah, you can't beat him up when you're 12, when you're like twice his size, it's different.
There was never, it was a very different relationship, much more like uncle nephew
And then what activities were you in? Sports? Were you in theater? Were you music? What kind of things did you enjoy as a young person?
I was in all of the above. I played soccer. I was the captain of the soccer team in high school, played soccer in college. I also did theater. I did musicals, and student directed productions, directed a production of Much Ado About Nothing my senior year in high school, and was in choir and did singing. So I was an all of the above kind of guy. And that's a consistent theme in my story. I'm the only one of the three boys that ended up being close with both parents. My parents got divorced when I was just after I was born, when I was about 6 months old. I was the peacemaker between the brothers. I was the best man in my oldest brother's wedding and the middle brother's wedding. And so, I've always sort of been that person that tries to bring people together and tries to be probably an artifact of being the youngest and having to survive as well.
Yeah, interesting. I'm kind of that role as the middle child. So I kind of see how that as the middle child, you kind of bounce between the two, but as the youngest also works. Yeah, family dynamics, so interesting. I love that question. So we're going to switch gears a little bit. Are you an introvert or an extrovert or an ambivert?
I'm an ambivert. I love being at the front of the room. I'm one of the few people on the planet, I think, that loves public speaking. I really enjoy that. I also enjoy working in groups. I also enjoy sitting quietly in the back, depending on what the content is. And I don't love what I'll call sort of like a random social activity where you go to a big group of people, like a convention, where you don't know anybody. I do love gatherings with lots of friends, but I'm not at home in a crowd of people I don't know. So I think ambivert is probably the right answer.
Sounds like you can adapt to any of those environments. Like me, I remember thinking networking was always kind of that big conference room thing, but once you really learn what networking is, it doesn't have to be that, right? And I'd rather be around a handful of folks than the room of 1,200. Except for usually in the room at 1,200, you can find that handful that you can connect with. But
Yeah, that's the trick. I think when you're in the crowd, it's to find a few people to focus on.
yeah,
Start a few conversations. When I switched my networking perspective from, okay, I'm going to try to meet as many people as I can, to I'm going to try and leave here having made 2 or 3 good connections, even in an hour and a half, that really was very helpful for me.
yeah. And recognizing that everybody is feeling as uncomfortable as you, right? So if you can help them feel comfortable and you find someone that you can talk to for longer than a 2-minute spiel,
Yep.
it sure makes everybody feel better. So, okay. On the fun meter scale of 1 to 5, 1 being a couch potato and 5 being the life of the party, where do you put yourself?
Oh, I'm probably a 4. My friends probably think of me as a 5, but I like being a couch potato. So I'm definitely goofy, organizing events and group trips. Just did one last month with some close friends. But I love just as much to sit on the couch and relax.
So that pulls you down from the 5 because
Yeah.
you do like being that couch potato. Yeah, sometimes the life of the parties do need their time, their couch time. It can't always be the life of the party, right?
Yep. You got
Okay,
it.
on the risk meter, same scale, 1 to 5, 1 being low risk taker and 5 being a high risk taker. Where do you put yourself?
That's an interesting question. So one of the necessary leadership paradoxes is being able to be both risky and pragmatic. And as the leader of a startup, I can say I have to be willing to do both. So I think of risk on a sort of 2-axis spectrum. It's what are the chances of failure and what are the consequences of failure. And I may take some pretty significant risks as a professional. Certainly, I do some pretty extreme outdoor activities. I do vertical caving. That would be the most extreme. I'm scuba diving. So I would say, I'm probably a 4. I'm not afraid of risk, but when the consequences of failure are high, I'm very cautious, unless the chances of failure are very low in that situation as well. But as a business leader, you have to be willing to take big risks when you know they align with purpose, and that's sort of the trick.
Yeah, absolutely. Love that. I love your 2 qualifications there. What are the chances and what are the consequences, and evaluating on those 2 fronts. Most of the people that I interview always talk about kind of professional or personal risk. They drop it into those 2 categories, but I like how you kind of are really focused really on the chances of risk and then the consequences, because that could apply to your personal life and or your professional life too.
Yeah,
So
I think it's a
very interesting.
great lens for decision making anytime there's risk, whether it's personal or
Yeah.
professional.
And especially when you're the leader, like you said, you've got to be able to balance that passion, the risk, and then the uh, being pragmatic all in the same time. So,
Yep.
okay, well, very cool. Well, Jervis, tell us what it's like to be the co-founder and CEO of ProsperBridge, and then we'll get into how did I get here?
For me, it's the best job in the world. When you find your purpose, when work ceases to become work and starts to become living out your purpose, that's a really special moment. And I hope that everybody has the opportunity to get there at some point in their life. And ProsperBridge is really about empowering everyone, regardless of their background, race, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, empowering everyone to have the opportunity to make meaningful progress in a world that does such a good job of trapping people and keeping them in the same scarcity loops over and over and over again. ProsperBridge exists to help employers and employees break out of those cycles, sidestep a lot of the traps that are out there, particularly in our financial system, and give them the opportunity to thrive across every dimension of their life. So it's a job I absolutely love.
Yeah, I got to tell you, when you start thinking about financial decision making and how people think about finances, there are so many traps, right? And the whole scarcity model that can come from either your parents or your upbringing, or your culture. I mean, there's so many influences. So I love that. And I know the work that you do at ProsperBridge is quite powerful. So awesome. Well, I love too how you said that when you find your purpose, it kind of changes everything. And sometimes we don't recognize when we're in a really good place in our lives, right? So I love it when someone can actually, step into that and recognize that. So
Yeah.
then that leads the question, how did I get here? When you were junior high school, were you thinking, oh, someday I'm going to be a founder and a CEO of a company?
Candidly, yes. I always pictured myself as a leader. I have been put in leadership positions from a very young age. And so I think I believed I was always going to be running a company. Certainly not this company, but I did have a passion for finance. So my stepdad, you'll remember my parents separated before I turned 1. My mom remarried, both my mom and dad remarried before I was 6. So I had a stepdad and a stepmom that very much felt like second moms and dads to me. And my stepdad was a financial advisor, and my dad ran a mortgage company. So I was one of those, strange 12-year-olds that was excited about finance and thought that's where I was going to be. I used to read the Wall Street Journal with my stepdad at the breakfast table every morning. I was fascinated by markets and the idea that you could just, buy a stock and money would turn into more money. Won the stock market game in high school. Got to college and started taking econ classes and was bored to tears. So ended up double majoring in theater and international relations and playing soccer and working my way through college. And that sort of was the beginning of the journey here.
Wow. Wow. So it sounds like you're a very busy person, that you have to be having a lot of different variety in your life as well as different activities to keep the mind going, I guess, huh?
Yeah, I do like I'm definitely someone that likes a variety. I get physical exercise every day. I love to learn. I'm constantly learning new things, reading books, articles, doing research. And then I love my work, my job, and trying to improve and make better what we're doing at ProsperBridge all the time.
Wow. Well, that's great. You had such an interest as a young person in finances because a lot of young people don't. That's a big parenting can be a big parenting battle sometimes, right? The whole how do you manage your money? How do you save your money? And yet for you to be interested, I see certain young people and they're drawn to that and they're all about how do I earn more? What do I do? What do I do? And the curiosity is awesome. So that carried you into college, but then like you said, you got a little bit bored. So you had to do all those other things.
Yeah, yep. So post college, I took a pretty long and winding road to get back to finance, but I did eventually.
Yeah. So what did you end up, graduating with? What kind of degrees then?
Yep, my degrees are actually in political science. My international relations degree, I converted to poli-sci at the last minute. That was just because my university didn't offer the last course I needed to get. They canceled the last course I needed to get my international relations degree. So really, I was an IR, a bachelor in international relations and a bachelor in theater. And theater I did. I came to college with almost a year's worth of credits, and theater was just sort of my fun major. I didn't have to do a lot of gen ed because I came with so many credits, and so I just did theater for fun. It was going to be a minor, but I did enough classes in order to get it
Yeah.
as a major. So I have a bachelor in theater and in poli-sci.
Okay. So when you're leaving college, then what kind of job did you think you were going to get? I mean, did you have kind of a target job? You're like, oh, this is the ideal thing for me now with this international relations slash poli sci. Were you going to go into politics, you think? Or
Another good question and a very difficult answer. I think like most kids graduating college, I didn't really know where I was headed. Coming into college, I thought I was headed into the finance route. I spent my time in college really realizing that doing books and maybe investment analysis wasn't where didn't excite me. And so I did love theater. I loved writing. I had a talent for writing. And so I moved to LA where my girlfriend lived and some friends from college and moved in with them and spent 2 years working as a temp and writing a screenplay. I wrote a screenplay and, did my best to get, not even to get it picked up, just to get someone to read it, which I had very limited success with. And then I went from there to being a director of development for nonprofit. And then I went from there to coaching soccer, college soccer, for 2 seasons, so a little over a year, and working as an admin at my alma mater. And then once I got married, my first marriage, I settled down, and I went right back to finance, and that's when I became a financial advisor and started my career in finance. But let's see, that was 6 years after I graduated from college.
Yeah. So were those opportunities then, like the director of development and the coaching, where did they just kind of pop up? And so you're like, oh, let me experiment with that. Let me play with this.
Yeah,
Let me try this.
Yeah, going back to my, sort of go where the wind takes me, and love for so many different disciplines. The director of development work I would have done longer. It was a challenging. The chairman of the board of directors of that nonprofit made it pretty clear that. So what happened was, all right, let me take a step back, Kathy. This is an organization that I was very passionate about. It's a character education and summer camp in northern Michigan, Camp Leelanau, Kohana. And I had spent at that time, I'd spent 16 summers at that camp. And I'd also worked in their off-season programs with public schools and at-risk youth on ropes course, outdoor education. So some ecology, but mostly we're focused on character ed. And, so you're taking, inner city kids that have never been in the woods, never seen darkness, which is a really interesting thing that I think a lot of us don't think about. Even if you grow up in the suburbs, you can experience darkness, mostly darkness. But if you live in the inner city and you've never been anywhere else, you've never been in a very, when you're outside, it's never been dark. And so love that work, and actually wrote a paper to the organization saying, here's what you should do for the long-term financial viability of the organization. Had no intention of executing that plan myself. The board came back to me and said, we love this idea. In fact, we'd love you to do it. And so that's how I got hired and got that job. It was work I loved, but it became pretty apparent inside of 2 years that they weren't going to let me, and not they, it was really the chairman of the board, wasn't going to let me do the work that I was hired to do. And that made me want to leave. And the soccer coaching job was at my alma mater, where my girlfriend was attending. Eventually, my first wife was attending college, was finishing up college, and that's why that's probably one of the primary reasons I took that job. But I did love it as well.
Yeah. Well, I love kind of drilling down into how you do make decisions, because, when people are going through transitions or times when they feel stuck, it's, it's hard to find those opportunities. And sometimes it's easier to know what you don't want to do than it is to find that passion or that purpose. So anyway, so I'm glad you kind of backed up and shared that. So again, I see this purpose-driven person. Obviously, you were so purpose-driven, you wrote a paper about how you thought it should be run differently.
Yep.
And several people thought it was a good idea, but in the end, it got blocked somehow. So okay, cool. So then what made you decide to actually say, okay, is it the whole, I was getting married, I need a different job now, I need to settle down and really start a career and go into finance?
Yeah, we talked about some of those career transitions and how I'm a purpose-driven person. I think if I probably always have been a purpose-driven person. I just never knew what my purpose was, So I don't think the way that I made any of those decisions is particularly insightful for anybody else. I don't think I did a particularly good job in my early career of navigating, what was the right work for me. So I wouldn't share any of that as a great tool for someone to lean on. And even going into finance, it was sort of like, okay, well, I'm getting married. I want to have a family. It's time for me to sort of quote unquote get serious and find jobs that actually pay the bills. And finance was something I had an aptitude for and a love for, and so that's where my head went after I got married. And I don't even think that decision-making process was particularly good. And I did very well very quickly in finance. I was selling securitized real estate, 1031 exchanges for high net worth clients. This is in 2007. This is when I started. Got my licenses, and I liked the work, but I didn't love it because it was very transactional, and I'm a relational person. And but it was very lucrative. And so if the real estate crisis of 2008 had never happened, I don't know what path my life would have taken. But the turning point for me, Kathy, was definitely in 2009. And this is 10 years after another turning point, but I'll come back to that another time. In 2009, my income was down 80%. My wife left me. My dad died, and I lost my house, all from February of 9 to February of
10. Yeah.
And
this is when the economy and the mortgage business, everything was tanking, right?
Yep. Yeah. Through the real estate market. The volume in my particular field was down 94% from the third quarter of 2000. I'm sorry, the fourth quarter of 2007 to the fourth quarter of 2008. So it wasn't like there was still some opportunity if you could find it. It was like someone just turned the lights off. The party was over. And so, that 12-month period in 2009 was just so brutal. And what it taught me, other than some really important lessons about faith and who I was as a person, what it taught me was that we have a financial system that's very much built on success. And when you're not successful, it's predatory. So I had done very well very quickly. I went to my financial team and I said, guys, I'm in crisis. I need help. What can you do? And they said, we can't do anything. Here's your money back. It's worth about 2/3 of what you gave us, and come back when things are good again. And that planted the seed that became ProsperBridge. How do we give people access? Here I am, I grew up very privileged, white, straight male, Christian, went to a private school, had a college scholarship, and yet, when I was facing a real challenge, the system had nothing for me. And that just taught me this lesson that we needed to fix that. We needed to create a system that could help everybody thrive. And so it took me a long time to figure out that was my purpose. But in 2017, I started actively working on how can we, and I at the time, I was at a Fortune 100 financial firm and wanted to fix the system from within. But by 2019, realized that wasn't going to happen. And so myself and a few friends left and started another company, which eventually led to the formation of ProsperBridge.
Yeah. Well, how did you get through such a tough year? I mean, you mentioned all the professional crisis that was going on in your world, but then there was also your family and emotional crisis, losing your dad, losing your wife, losing your house. I mean, how did you get through that year?
Well, that's such a good question. I mean, the easy answer and the true answer for me is God and faith. I went through a stretch when my wife left me. It was to me, it was pretty unexpected. There was some infidelity and that I didn't know about. And I came home to a note on the door saying, I want to leave. And that led to ironically, I was coming home from church on a Wednesday night, and there was the note on the door. And
man.
It was February 12th. And so, once it became clear that was happening, that there was no way to salvage the marriage. I was devastated. I didn't feel like God was my friend. I didn't feel like, if God was there at all. But eventually, what happened was some old friends that couldn't have known the situation I was in just started reaching out to me and saying how much they appreciated how it impacted their lives. And one of the things that I think is counterintuitive is when we find ourselves isolated, it's very tempting to want to do internal work, right? To either fix ourselves or beat ourselves up, or, we don't want to go out. The last thing you want to do for most people when you're going through an experience like that is go out and tell the world, hey, I'm getting divorced. My wife's leaving me. How can you help me? And yet that really is something that now I would lean into. The support of a community, I think, is essential. And so I would say, ultimately, faith and purpose and collaboration and, I don't know what the right word is for it, but coming together with people were the two things that helped me through that situation, and ultimately are the two things that drove me to found ProsperBridge as well.
Wow. That's so true. I've had other friends that I've seen have, crisis in their lives, and it's so easy to just kind of wrap yourself up and curl up, and I know I've reached out to some of these friends at times, and just it reminds me there's a couple I need to reach out to now, because you can see the withdrawing, and then they create that isolation, and things aren't going well, and so they don't want to be the wet blanket. They don't want to be talking about things aren't going well, but yet you got to be around your friends and this support group, or you won't be able to move on, and you
Yeah.
just get stuck in this cycle. And that's part of why I started this podcast, is when I left the corporate space and was trying to find a new thing for me. I thought it would be back in corporate. It was incredibly hard. And I had another friend, and we really, the two of us worked well together because each one of us could lift each other at different times. But if we hadn't had each other, I think we both would have maybe kept spiraling. It's so easy to do that spiral when you don't have that positive influence and support around you. And it's hard to take the energy and go do that, but you need it, and other people can give you that. And I
Yep.
think if you're an introvert, it's even harder, right? Because you don't want to share those things, and it's easier to be, by yourself. So, thank you for sharing that. That wasn't easy, I know, going through that. And then on top of it, each time you thought you were getting maybe a little bit of air, then something else happened, right? Your
Yep.
dad passed, and then your business is not going well. I mean, wow.
Yeah. And I'm lucky that I had a support network that was able to, I think about that moment. I think about when I was living in LA about a year and a half in, I just completely ran out of money, and my cell phone wasn't even working. I had to use one of those old, credit card calling card things, go to a payphone and call my mom and beg for money. And now where I am with the research that I've done and the way that I've grown, I think, well, how lucky am I that I had someone to call and that I had people reaching out to me during those crises, because a lot of people don't have that support network. And if you don't, what are you going to do? Homelessness, crime, it's very difficult. I heard it said once, I know this is ubiquitous now, a lot of people have heard this, but being homeless isn't about running out of money, it's about running out of friends. And I think that's very true.
Mm-hmm. Wow. You mentioned that you got into this very specialized mortgages and stuff. How did you know to get into that? Did a friend or a mentor kind of say, hey, this is, if you want to get into finance, here's a great route to take? And then I guess a follow-up would be, then how did you then reinvent yourself once it then crashed in?
I didn't know I wanted to get into that. I was looking for opportunities. I started out again. So now we're in, I got married in December of 6. And my wife and I moved to St. Louis to be near her parents, actually to live with her parents after we got married. So we got there, I don't remember exactly what the timeline is. We had our honeymoon, so mid to late December. and started looking for work basically January 1st. No one's hiring right around Christmas time unless you want to work retail, which I have also done and highly recommend to everybody. Retail, food service, everybody should have to do it, one or the other.
Yeah, because we're all customers, and you got to be on the other side.
That's right. That's right. It's sort of like required military service in Israel. In the United States, you should have to either work food service or retail for a minimum of 6 months. Started looking for work, was looking in the financial field, and again, started out very introverted, looking on the internet, reading, I'm dating myself a little bit here, but even reading the classified ads in the newspaper and trying to find work. And about a month into that process of applying and getting a couple of interviews, but nothing really concrete, getting a couple of job offers even, but nothing that seemed appealing at all, I realized I needed to be with people. And so I changed my strategy and I started doing two things. One, and I love this idea even today, I said to myself, okay, instead of looking for a job, I'm going to find a way to add value or bless someone else at least once a day, every day. Because when you're unemployed, you can start to feel useless. And what I said is, no, I'm going to bring value into someone's life or day at least once a day, every day. And I was very faithful to that goal. There was not a day once I made that objective that I didn't hit it. So that could be anything from, seeing someone struggling to get something into their car and helping them put their stuff into their car, or reaching out to someone, a friend or a family member, or someone that needed support. It could be, helping a friend move, or doing a favor for someone. But the other thing I did was, again, I started reaching out to my network and just trying to get at least one meeting, whether that was in person or on the phone. There were no virtual meetings back then. At least one meeting per day, to try to, and once I started doing those two things within a few weeks, I had several opportunities, and this was the one that felt the most, it resonated with me the most in terms of financial opportunity, business opportunity, and probably most importantly, I liked the person running the company, because leadership, I like to say a good boss can make a bad job great, and a bad boss can make a good job horrible. So I even knew by then that I wanted to have a good boss.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you'd had a little bit of experience with stuff, just not in that field.
Oh yeah, quite a bit of experience.
So, yeah.
And I had worked for my dad in the mortgage business. I had worked at Restoration Hardware. I had worked at a diner. And in college, I had lots of different jobs. I worked food service in college largely because that was the best boss. My other jobs in college, I didn't like my bosses. So even though the work at the pub, the campus pub, was certainly not easy, and certainly not something that I thought was going to help me with my future career, it was social, and I liked the leadership. So
Yeah. Well, it's so great that early in life you figured that out about the boss, because sometimes it takes us too long to figure that out, and you get stuck or trapped in a situation, and you're like, what is not working here? And then you figure it out, well, it's not me.
Yep.
It's that person, it's that situation, and it can really tank things. So
yeah, that was the same thing at Restoration Hardware. I worked there several breaks, and I liked that work largely because, in fact, that's where I was working. It was right after I graduated college. That's where I was working on 9/11. I liked that work because of the leadership.
Yeah, it makes such a difference, such a difference. So how did you reinvent yourself then? You had this really low year, and your whole industry has imploded. What do you decide to do then?
I didn't reinvent myself, if I'm being honest. I knew I wanted to be, I was already in the process of becoming a full service financial planner instead of this transactional. And by January of 2009, I had all my licenses to be a full service planner. But I really naively thought that our transactional clients would just want me to be there, would want me to manage their entire portfolio, so that we could just go back to the folks that we had helped with these real estate transactions, and because we'd done such a good job, they would want us to manage their entire portfolio. That was not the case. So what caused me to reinvent myself was necessity, and God did most of the work, candidly. But Kathy, it was a long time. We're talking 2009 to, let's call it 2019, 10 years before that seed really crystallized into something tangible. It wasn't until we left that Fortune 100 financial firm that I really started to move in the direction of my purpose. And I'm going to come back to two things here that I think are so essential in discovering your purpose. One of them is collaboration. So more than anything else, what led me to where I am now was when we were working at that financial firm, and I'm not saying the name because I want to protect the guilty. When I was working at that financial firm, myself and two other managers that had identified that there were some real systemic problems inside of our business started meeting weekly. They both also happened to be Christians. And we would go into a boardroom and we would talk about how we could make things better and the people we wanted to help, and we would research the problem and we would pray. And that collaborative, spiritual, intellectual time really helped grow in me a desire to find and unlock my purpose. And I don't think it was conscious. It's just the process of collaborative problem solving really births in us new possibilities, new horizons. One of the coolest things about human beings is the power of dialogue. I wrote a paper on this in college about the difference between telling, selling, and dialogue. Dialogue or brainstorming is a very cool process where two people, so you and I, Kathy, could sit down and we could talk about any issue. And the cool thing about human beings is if you brought the sum of both of our knowledge and expertise to that issue together, okay, you added that all up. When you dialogue with someone, the two of you can walk away with much more than the sum of both of your knowledge. And that's a really cool thing that's unique to human beings. That when we collaborate, we essentially multiply our talents and our insight. And I believe that is, if not a necessity, if someone came to me and said, "How did you find your purpose?" the thing I would say, number one, is collaboration. And the second thing I would say is self-awareness. And not self-awareness in this is who I am, this is what I'm good at, although I think we should spend a lot more time in our educational system on those things, EQ, if you will. But how can I be a better person? Because I truly believe our purpose is tied to our talents, not our talents in terms of our hard skills, but our talents in terms of just how are we good at being a human? How are we good at relating to other humans or not? Are we better, as lone wolves? Really understanding how you operate at peak, mental wellness, emotional wellness, spiritual wellness capacity, and leaning into trying to improve yourself. And what I found was as I did that work, those two things really naturally guided me to where I am today.
Yeah. Wow. So much to dissect there. And one of the things that struck me but that you said was this notion of you and the collaboration of you and the other two people, and that you would spend time on what are the problems and how can we make it better. So you weren't in there really going, what's just wrong, and ranting about it, right? Which can happen, right, in a corporate environment when you get so caught up in the what are the problems. And then you can do that whole spiral thing backward again, and then you're not moving forward at all. But in this case, you were talking about how can we make it better? And then you put on top of that your own personal, can I be a better person? I mean, how does that not just create this great momentum in your world? And it's not a negative spiral. It's got to be like almost a positive, turbine, I think, in a way that it pulls you forward. And the other thing that struck me is that you weren't sitting there going, what's our purpose? What could we be doing? Because sometimes if you were trying to nail that, and I know I went through a period of that, what's my purpose? What's my purpose? And it was such a defeating discussion in my own brain. It didn't get me anywhere. But when you just start being in action and, like you said, problem solving, collaborating with others, talking with others, things start to reveal themselves.
For sure. There, I think of I need devices to help me remember everything. But I think of the 6 F's. If you can find yourself healthy in these 6 different areas, you're going to find your sense of purpose. And I think that's the self-work part, right? Like, I think searching for purpose can be counterproductive. It can be discouraging. It can be uncomfortable. But trying to figure out how you function best as a human, how are you, when are you healthiest? What are tasks that you love? What are relationships that you value? That is much more, I think, impactful. And so the 6 F's for me, the first one is faith. And if that doesn't have to be religion, it doesn't have to be God. It could be just your core values. But whatever is, you're sort of, these are the values, these are the ethics that when I follow, I feel happy and healthy. The next thing is relationships, and the F's there are family and friends. And I'm going in order of importance here. The next thing is fitness. What are the activities, mentally, physically, spiritually, that make me feel healthy? The next thing is finances, which I like to say of this list. Now we're to the 5th F. It's the least important, but the most essential. Without money, you can't really do anything, but money in and of itself is completely worthless.
And does it affect those other things?
That's right.
Well, it sort of does, because if you, like you said, if you don't have the means, if you don't have safety and security to go home at night, it's pretty hard to work on your physical fitness or on your friends and family when you're not sure where you're gonna,
dollar bills, they're not food, clothing, or shelter. Again, money on its own is completely useless, but when you connect it to those other things, it becomes really powerful. And the last thing is future. Where am I headed, or where do I want to be headed? And again, not necessarily in terms of my purpose or even my career, but what are the skills I want to develop? What are the things I find myself wanting to be good at? And when you sort of think across those dimensions and how, excuse me, when I'm at my healthiest, what am I doing in those 5 or 6 areas, depending on if you look at friends and family as 1 or 2, that to me is much more, it's going to point you towards your purpose much more than the question of what is my purpose, and trying to,
absolutely. I love how you've dissected that, and your 6 F's or 5 F's, I think, are really going to be powerful. And then the one about future, and again, it isn't that you have to have it all figured out. And there was another point in my life too, I'm like, I got to have it figured out. I've been trying to figure this out. And so we don't want to put figured out in your F's. It's an F word, but we were going to skip that part. But it is, I love that what's the direction I'm heading? What do I want to learn? Where do I want to be growing? That's a very different way of looking at things. And you know what? Your purpose gets revealed then, because those kind of things then just start to pop forward. And it becomes way more powerful.
Yeah, even so for me, I mentioned earlier, caving it's probably my favorite physical activity, period. And most people, immediately look at me with sort of that look you're giving me right now when I talk about caving.
Like in Colorado, are there caves in Colorado? But
go ahead. Yeah. There's caves all over the West. And there's a lot of caves in the Midwest too, actually. I was drawn to that activity, naturally drawn to it. A friend, we were at Joshua Tree, which if people aren't familiar with that, Joshua Tree is basically a bunch of piles of rocks in the desert in Southern California that are great for climbing and scrambling. And what my friend noticed when we were there was that I liked to not just go over the rocks, but I like to go through the rocks. I like to go into sort of the boulder pile and slither my way up to the top of the pile. And he said, look, you probably love caving. And it was that simple. And I said, let's give it a shot. We went on a trip. I was immediately hooked. And now when I think about caving, it's an activity where you constantly have to be making risk assessments. It's an activity where you're literally exploring in the dark, trying to figure out your way, and having to be very careful about marking your way so that you can find your way back. And all of those things are very much part of my work as a CEO and founder of a startup. You have to be willing to explore. You have to be constantly assessing risks, and you have to enjoy that ride if you're going to find success in it. So when you think about again yourself in different dimensions as opposed to just what's my vocation, what's my calling. I think that those things can actually take you to your vocational calling much more effectively than just sitting down and ruminating about your past experiences.
Yeah, and trying to journal and
Yeah.
reading books and trying to go different directions. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Jervis, we could keep going all afternoon. I have all kinds of questions about paving and being a CEO and all those things, but we do have to start wrapping up here. So you've already touched on a couple of my closing questions, but maybe you would have another statement, or maybe you'll just kind of reiterate. But I have two closing questions. The first is, when you look back on your career, what do you think served you best? And that can be a characteristic or a strength or maybe a habit, a discipline. What do you think served you best?
Again, the easy and right relationship is my relationship with, or right answer is my relationship with God. That is definitely what has served me best. I know that that's not for everybody, but everybody has some type of belief system, and trying to figure out what that is, I think, is an important, again, not what's my purpose, but what's my belief system. What when I'm healthy, what am I doing? What are the qualities, the values that are important to me? And then the other thing is, for me, and this isn't something I really realized until a few years ago. I like to improve things. I want to make everything better. That is a blessing and a curse. The blessing side is that I am very good at that. The curse is that means that I always see something that's wrong. There's nothing that's ever perfect, and so I'm a very critical thinker, which again is a blessing and a curse. And those are just that's who I am, right? That's just part of me. I'm going to take a quick tangent here. My wife's favorite company and one of my favorite companies is Patagonia. And Patagonia, woven into their being, because the founder was so focused on this, Yvon Chouinard was so focused on environmentalism. That's why they're the best at it. All these other outdoor companies tried to essentially copy that through CSR initiatives. It's just not who they were. Figuring out who are you, what are your core values. It's different for everybody. There's not a right answer to that question. But I think that desire to improve has sort of guided me from place to. That's why I wrote that paper. That got me the director of development job. It can be very very good thing for a coach to have, and ultimately led me to where I am now.
Yeah, and as an athlete, right, the desire to improve. I can say I've done the Strength Finder tools, and one of my strengths is Maximizer. And it's similar in that it's about making things better. It's about maximizing things. So I do share that same critical thinking at times. And you're right, it's a strength and it's a curse. It can be that you're never satisfied.
Yeah.
You're always pushing, and and that critical thinking. And so I really have to, but this having the self-awareness to know that is really important, because then you can just say, no, it doesn't need to be better. This is just something I can just go with. There's no need to make this particular thing better, and
Yep.
just be part of it and go with it. Okay. Last question then. Any words of wisdom that impacted you when you were feeling stuck or in transition?
I've talked a lot about collaboration and self-work. I want to bring another dimension in here, and that's I think the third dimension and sort of the missing piece to how I ultimately found my purpose. And that's when you look at the world, what calls out to your heart, and by that I mean, what area of brokenness in human life do you want to fix? It's very easy to, and I'm not talking about, seeing someone that's homeless on the street and wanting to help them. I'm talking about looking at the world, from sort of a top-down perspective and all the challenges that people face, and saying what really activates not your emotion, but what really activates your passion. So not what makes you sad or not what drives you to sympathy, but what, based on your core values, do you feel like you want to go fix? That adding that dimension, led me from being what I would say is a very stubborn political conservative that believed that people either had success or failure in the world based on their hard work and very traditional, Judeo-Christian values, to realizing that we have a whole bunch of systems that really punish a lot of people based on their background, their race, their gender, their ethnicity, their sexual orientation. And it broke my heart. It broke my heart to see who I was. But now it's given me the fuel to come out and try to fix those things and make a world where equity is possible, where everyone has the opportunity to progress. And a place that can be more fair. So I think that what's the brokenness I want to fix is an important third question to ask.
Yeah. How can you make an impact, right?
Yeah.
What's that thing that's driving you? So, wow. Well, thank you. This has been very, very interesting. I love the theme that's weaved through here with the whole purpose and how you've kind of gone through so many things. And there wasn't an easy route here. In a way there was, because you said you were privileged, right? And how you grew up, but then
Sure.
found that there were systems and there were challenges that were going to not make that an easy road going forward. So, well, thank you for sharing your story. You don't know who needs to hear this today and who you might move, touch, and inspire. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Okay, well, listeners, on that note, we'll wrap up for today. And if you've enjoyed today's interview, please subscribe below so you'll be alerted when other interviews are published. If you have any questions for me or for Jervis, you can find this interview on my website, lifestorycurator.com. It's in the blog section, and I'll post there Jervis's social media contact information so that you can reach out to him and learn about ProsperBridge, and or just, I guess, reach out to him if you'd like. And on that note, I'll say stay safe, stay well, and let's keep sharing those stories. Have a great day.